Hello, welcome to another Omnia Performance podcast. And anybody who's watching through the YouTubes will see that I am on my own. This is a solo podcast because Fergus has left me, the blighter. He's off in blighter. What a word! Didn't even know that was coming myself. He is in London at the moment and working away, doing his London thing, and left me on my lonesome to talk to you lovely people. The good thing is that we have had a barrage of questions through on the Instagram page where we asked you send a lot of questions in, and I'll solo answer them here on the podcast as best I can. Any that I didn't understand the answer to, I've completely ignored. So if your question doesn't get answered, it's because I didn't know the answer. That's not true. We've got the housekeeping stuff to cover off, as we always do. I think if you go on Spotify, right in the middle somewhere, there's a follow button. If you go on Apple, somewhere up the top right, there's a subscribe button, vice versa, perhaps on both of those platforms. Make sure you hit one or other or both of those, depending which platform you're using. And that gives us an opportunity not just to kind of push the message out and allow more people to listen to the podcast, but it gives us a chance to kind of see who's listening in and sort of understand what kind of episodes you like and make better content for you. As well as that, do get in touch. Tell us if you like it and do all the other things. Subscribe is one, 5 stars is another one, and share it everywhere you can. So that's the housekeeping, and let's get into it. Like I say, we sent out on Instagram a quick message saying that I would be doing this, and we expected a few questions back, and I've got something like a good 60, 70 questions here, so I won't be able to answer all of them, not simply because of the fact that I might not know the answers. In fact, most of them I've got an answer to, and there are some repeats and some double ups here, which means that I'm answering more than one person at a time. So if your question's being answered but I didn't call you by name, apologies for that. And let's just crack on with it. I think that's probably the best idea. Okay, I'm going to go through it in order as best I can. Hopefully we just kind of go through this and don't meet too much of a strange dead end, but it'd be difficult for me to try and put these in any kind of format for you because they've just come through as and when you want. So first question we've got here is from Max Murphy. Hi Max, I know Max personally and he's a lovely lad. His question is, any metrics you use to judge accumulated fatigue? ? For example, Tom Hallivan seems to use grip and HR. Yes, we do that. And actually, Max receives programming from me directly and may not realize he's actually going through that those metrics every day. An example actually we could use is my own of recent. I'm rehabbing. A couple of weeks ago I came in here and I lifted my deadlift, worked up towards what should have been X number for the day, and I only got close to about 80% of it. My function, my neurological function, my capability, my readiness that day meant I couldn't possibly have gotten near my 1 rep max or the rep that I was going for. Instantly, that is a metric. Instantly, that tells me that I can't make that lift anymore. And it also tells me not that I got much weaker since the previous week. That would be impossible, but that clearly I'm under recovered. So straight away, the very first priority exercise in my programming for the day told me directly that I wasn't ready. Other exercises that we like to put in for athletes, sometimes directly we say this is a measure, sometimes it's there, and then I just look at the feedback and I can ease backwards and forwards based on that. You can do this for yourself. Things like a vertical leap, broad jump, grip strength is a good proxy. It's not ideal because it relies on other factors, but there's a good reason Tom will be using that. But lots of exercises where ultimately an expression of power or an expression of strength can be used to determine whether there's been a drop-off if you're cyclically turning these things over. So if, for instance, I could pull 200 on week 1, pull 200 on week 2, and on week 3 I only managed 180 and it felt like RPE 10, then clearly I haven't got weaker. I've just become under-recovered. And so the rest of that day, maybe the following 2 days, I'll ease back everything. It's a sort of a straight-up auto-regulation tool driven by the metrics, which are the numbers that I know I should be able to hit. Hopefully that kind of answers that question. Can Omnia make... Oh, I didn't understand that word, but I do now. Can Omnia make a maintenance training plan for time between training goals? We do and are doing, which is a sort of a weirdly double-edged response. Going forward, we're actually going to make a kind of a GPP track that you guys can join in on and allow you to kind of sit and float and work on your fitness and then decide which way you want to pivot in terms of goals. We do also already have the training plans available, which are kind of segmented out to novice, intermediate and advanced, where we have the Hybrid 101, Hybrid Performance and In Omni Apparatus. None of those have a specific goal mechanism behind them. They're all designed just to get you, quote unquote, more hybrid, which is a misnomer, but allow you to push your fitness up, essentially, based on the level at which you meet that at. So we actually do have 3 programs live that you can do that on. And going forward, we're going to make that a little bit easier, almost, if you like, to access. So yes and yes. That was from Jessica Bivens, so just in case you didn't know who you were. Next question from Jonny Heaney Ultra. Should a hybrid athlete work on flexibility? If so, what way and how often? So this is the first of the "it depends" responses, and anybody who's listened to the podcast for long enough will know that we don't like, but we often say it depends. Reason being, it depends on the flexibility, it depends on why you are inflexible, depends if that flexibility is of merit, etc., etc. So we don't have a standardized format where we say, you know, we expect you to be able to do a pancake or to, you know, touch your toes with a weighted hat on or something, whatever people do. We don't expect you to be able to do the splits, etc., etc. And sometimes that's going to speak against your sporting outcome. So there is a need for a certain amount of inflexibility sometimes in sports. If you had a laxity in your shoulders, for instance, and you were overhead pressing a massive stone in a strongman competition, that sort of extra mobility and extra flexibility, which are 2 different things, of course, might not be of use. So it depends. It depends on the outcomes. We don't need to push you to be able to do X metrics in flexibility. It depends whether the flexibility is something that actually speaks to you. So what way and how often? Probably a bigger question than for here. And it depends, Jonny, on your goals. So that was the first "it depends" answer. And hopefully it wasn't as vague as I felt it was. Johnny Evs, Johnny EVS, GPS watch features. The market is a minefield. It's not actually a question, it's just a statement. I agree. The market is a minefield. Actually, there is a couple more questions. So, Jonny, I'm going to hold your question there for the moment and come back to it. There's a couple more questions about watches, GPS, wearable tech. And I'll wrap them all up in one, but I'll make sure, because I have seen one of the questions later on that be interesting to dive into. So, Jonny, I'm going to put you on hold for now and come back to that. Next one, Anzi Kumar. I hope I'm doing these justice. What's more challenging in coaching? Training plan or things outside plan? Discipline, stress, life? So from a coaching perspective, I think that's the question you're asking, is that from a coaching perspective, what's more difficult for us to manage for an athlete? That's my interpretation of the question, as opposed to what is the most difficult as an athlete to, or what's the most impactful. I guess the answer to the question will cover both. And guess what? It depends. If we can get things in a kind of priority order, from a purely coaching perspective, what we're really looking for is continuity and adherence. You know, the scientific methodology that underpins our programming, etc., we can bang on about all day, but if somebody doesn't do it, it doesn't matter. So ultimately, we need adherence. We need people to be able to get to the training. We need that to be something that they can continue to get to. From a strength and conditioning perspective, as coaches, we need to manage that training so that the ability to recover from it is appropriate, and therefore the ability to progress and adapt is also available. A lot of that then bleeds into the second part of your question, because if we can set up a brilliant plan that you're adherent to, that you have continuity in, that you enjoy, but then you have a great big project lands on your desk at work, or you're a copper on the beat and you have an extraordinary night after a bloody, festival or a concert or whatever it might be, you just foil a bank robbery, then the next day your program no longer exists in the same space. So from a coaching perspective, from a one-to-one coaching perspective, certainly looking after athletes, it's very, very much key, and probably sits at the top of the priority list for us, is that communications are as open as they can be, and as open as people want to be. We can't force people to tell us private things. But the more that we know, the more that we know. So I think that it does depend. It depends on the situation. But if we can get a good, steady, solid program in place without too much external stress, we know that program works. then we can manage the external stressors with that sort of dependent variable managed at the bottom. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does make sense. Made sense to me. Jamie, did that make sense?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Okay. Anybody listening in knows that Jamie is on the other side of this camera and probably playing Call of Duty or something, but now and again I'm going to shout on him for his help. Food. Calories while injured. There are actually a couple of questions here. Food question mark. Calories while injured. That's from Neve Nibbles. I'm not going to spell that out. You probably know who you are, Neve. Yes, I think you should have some calories when you're injured. That's the facetious answer to the question. I guess before we go any further, I'm going to caveat this question and all the others with there's always going to be an it depends answer. And this one, it depends on the injury. Certainly, I can see no mechanism by which the answer isn't up your calories. If you were in a deficit or you had some kind of fat loss campaign going on, or you're making weight for a competition or something and you get injured, the first thing you should be doing is adding that food back in. If you are in a maintenance, I think adding a couple of 100 calories is going to be beneficial. Essentially, when you're injured, your body has to work to repair you. That's simple, isn't it, really? If you are asking the body to repair and to adapt to injury and to work on that repair, then you're going to need that little bit more protein. You're going to need certainly more calories to cover the overall metabolic requirement that is present when you're injured. And therefore more calories is the answer. I think it comes up later on and there might be a bit more complexity to the question, but ultimately the answer is going to be the same as a couple of hundred more calories. And again, that depends on the individual. Somebody who's 15 stone might need a little bit more percentage-wise. Somebody who's 8 stone will need a little bit less. And it depends on the extent of the injury. Third-degree burns are going to need a hell of a lot of caloric intervention, I would imagine. A twisted ankle might just need you to rest up. And there is the second part of the question. It depends on your activity levels. If you have to kind of manage that based on your new TDEE. Please do refer back to the podcast that we've had with Tom, where he's going to talk about and has talked about your basal metabolic rate, your total daily energy expenditure, and these kind of factors which drive how many calories you're going to need per day. If, like I've been before, you find yourself incapacitated through a knee injury, then you're just frankly going to be doing a shit ton more sitting about. Therefore, your caloric demand is going to come down because you might have been walking the dogs 3 times a day up to that point. So you're going to have to manage it based on that. But all other things being equal, the reparation requires calories, so add them in. Another one from Neve. How to train with injury. I'm sensing a reason for these questions, Neve. How to train with injury and preserve aerobic fitness. I'll try and give a shorter answer to this one. It depends. It depends on your injury. The easy response, and probably the correct response here to preserve aerobic fitness, is find a modality that you can continue to work in zone 2 and any other variants, but zone 2 obviously for pushing your aerobic fitness here, that doesn't interfere with the injury. So back to my knee injury, I could at one point sat on a rower with my leg on a skateboard. There are always ways around things. I did some water running. That's odd for people who don't know what that is, but I put a weight, a buoyancy aid on myself and ran in the water. There's lots of things you can do. You just have to be a little bit imaginative. It's unlikely, unless you're in a full body cast, that there isn't something you can do. Again, I've used a hand cycle when my leg has been in a cast. All kinds of things you can do. So it probably isn't going to be specific to the modality that you might have been training in. So if you're a runner and you've injured your ankle or something, you can't run, then you might have to operate in a capacity that is not speaking to running as a skill, but you can still work on aerobic capacity. You just have to find a modality that doesn't interfere with that injury. Hopefully that answers your question. Next one is from James Schrank. Hopefully I haven't bastardized your names too much. I think I have with James though. Apologies, James. Should I lose muscle to get faster? I don't see any reason why you should. No. Should I is a kind of a too tight of a question. Would it be good for me? I suppose it would be different. And again, I'd need to know a little bit more about why you're pondering that. My expectation is that you feel like you're maybe too big and like kind of sizing down would let you run faster. Generally, I would say go for the lowest hanging fruit there. Try and preserve your muscle. It's going to make you more powerful, more efficient. We're very, very much on board with the idea that being muscle bound is a different story, but more muscle and more power and more strength is actually going to make you more efficient as in aerobic capacity. To get faster, I'm assuming you mean running. If you are so large that your gait is affected by that muscle mass, then you might want to consider kind of working that back a little bit, and it depends how easy it is for you to hold on to that. If you're that big, chances are just doing less strength training is going to kind of allow that maintenance to drop back a little bit. So yeah, should I don't know, it's entirely up to you, James. I would say that body fat's the first port of call. I would say that muscle is going to help you. It depends if you're quote unquote muscle bound. If you are and it's affecting your gait, then it might be worth looking into. From Danimal Jiu Jitsu, can you tell your I'm a ninja story? No. Next one. Axel Duffy, how do you structure training plan around a physically demanding job? Well, we've actually kind of answered that a little bit earlier on, in the sense that what we want to do is be able to make sure that we understand how much demand that job has, whether or not that's an aerobic demand or whether or not it's a really kind of heavy muscular demand like a scaffolder or something, or I guess that would be both. So depends on the job, but ultimately we want to find something that fits our minimum effective dose. We want you to be able to maintain the capability you have to kind of progress without it being overrun by these other things. And also, calories are going to count. You want to make sure that you're eating enough for it. But if you're not recovering from your physically demanding job at the moment, then adding more stress in terms of training is not going to help at all. So you kind of want to have a play around and see where it is that the demand is. If your demand's highly aerobic at work, then you probably don't need a lot of aerobic work and you can focus more on strength. If it's the other way around, then you might want to focus more on aerobic work. You've just got to play around with the variables a little bit and find out where the space is and find out what your recovery tolerance is. Struggled to get that out. So again, it depends, but I would find what the minimum dose is. Add a little bit and see whether you can recover. Add a little bit, see where you can recover. And where you're adding, add it to where the demand isn't already skewed. David Coombs, 39. How best to train as a new dad? We've got this quite a lot, and I get this a lot as a question. Less than you think is the answer. I think every dad or every expectant dad goes into these things and thinking with a lot of hope and and I mean that in a positive sense, but with a lot of ideas about what I can do is structure my day this way, that way, and then I'll get back for the baby, and then I'll be present for my wife or my partner or whoever. And actually, the best laid plans of mice and men. I think that not dissimilar to the previous question, that the best thing to do is accept that for emotional and psychological reasons, as much as physical sort of availability and time reasons, you're going to find yourself less inclined to train. You're going to find yourself with less opportunity to train, and you're going to find that motivation to train dwindles a little bit. So I think that accepting that training is going to really have to dial back, and you might really want it to dial back. And like I say, very similar to the previous question, you want to find a minimal load. You want to find probably what the least amount of work you have to do to maintain your current fitness is, and spread that out with little kind of time blocks across the week as much as you can. Try and fit it into your day. Try and make it a habit. Try and make it something that works for you and your partner and anybody involved. But try not to kind of push towards great big goals at this point. Your new normal is something that's going to take some time to work to find out and to understand, rather. So whilst you're trying to find that new normal and find out how you cope as a parent, and each child is different, so it could be, Jamie has a kid and tells me it's easy. I have one and I find out it's not easy at all. That's because I'm not Jamie. So we need to find out what that new normal is and then adjust based on that. So I think the first thing to do is lower your expectations in a really positive sense, because you've got something wonderful happening in your life, and minimize the space that you need for it, and just sort of apply a maintenance plan until such times as you're able to grow from that. Josh Smith, ex-CVI, can you lose body fat while training for a triathlon? And in brackets, he's got beginner. Yes, to a point. We, as a sort of a standard response to this, would say that whilst you're in a kind of preparatory phase for anything, that's probably not the best time to be trying to lose body fat. Now, beginner lends a different spin to it to a certain degree, because it depends how far into that kind of novice status you are. There is a bit of recomposition can go on just when you start dialing in things and, nailing the macronutrients, getting things right, that new stimulus can become something that you get these kind of newbie gains and all this kind of stuff happens. So for a while, even if you're not actively looking to lose weight or change body composition, it might change anyway. After a certain point, you're going to have to find yourself in a surplus. In a deficit, quite the opposite. If you're in a deficit, then there is no doubt whatsoever that's going to affect your performance and it's going to affect your opportunity to adapt. So whilst you're training to one, the closer you get to an event, the less likely anybody in a position to give you advice will give you the advice to cut weight. So I'd say the answer is sort of yes. It can be done. It can be done with a lot of kind of close scrutiny. As a beginner, I'm going to be rude and suggest you might not have that ability yet to really scrutinize that granular detail. So I wouldn't think it would be a great idea. I'd think aim towards the event itself, feed that performance, feed the outcome, feed the adaptation, and then once you've hit that, then that's a nice opportunity in that kind of off season before your next challenge to work on the body fat goals. Can be done, but it's very tricky. And do you need to do it that way? Nicholas M. Rees. Is that right? Yes. Nicholas.m.Rees. Can you use kettlebells in a hybrid program? Or does the limited weight hinder progress? You can use them. We use them. We have them, kettlebells, much to people's chagrin because some of the work that I put in with kettlebells makes people cry. But yes, kettlebells are a great tool, as is anything, but kettlebells are very, very useful. So yeah, I guess the question is asking, in place of barbell work for compound movements and things. And yeah, to a degree, there's going to be a certain point to which you can progress, although you can get massive kettlebells, which are almost impossible to lift off the ground. So the progression is only going to be hindered by how heavy a kettlebell you can get access to. You can skin a cat 1,000 ways, many more probably. So yes, you can use it. No, it's not going to hinder things. There are sort of rep schemes somewhere between 6 and 30, if not more variance either side, is going to see some hypertrophy. We're going to see strength gains using those rep schemes. So anything that you can lift within that rep range, given you stick to that rep range and force that stimulus to kind of repeat, you're going to get stronger. You're going to get stronger until such times as you're way too strong for kettlebells, but I've not met anybody who is. So yeah, they can be applied. You're not going to get the same benefits probably. It's not going to be the same malleability of the program as maybe using barbells and all the rest of it, but without a doubt, yeah, kettlebells are a great tool. Please do continue to use them. Is there a reason? This is Ralph Slick, I think. Is there a reason there's no 10k hybrid plan available? Yes, I haven't written one. Garouche 6. Tips for improving bench press total. Bench more. That's rude, isn't it? We could have a whole podcast about it, really. But ultimately, you want to get your frequency and your volume right. You want to know what your actual maximum is at the moment, and you want to build a progressive plan and take the time to build that, working within the rep ranges that allow you to get stronger. We've got plenty of programs. Every single program we've got that has SBD as a metric will improve your bench press total. So please come see us. But ultimately, getting the frequency, volume, and load right and being continuous with it will yield those goals. So be patient and keep at it, I think, is probably the best advice. Stephanie Patterson, 2201. I keep picking up injuries that set me back each time I get... Oh dear. I keep picking up injuries that set me back each time I get some good momentum. Help. I wish I could, Stephanie. You drop us a line, drop us an email. We'll chat directly about your issues. The reasons people generally pick up injuries are multifactorial, but in general, it's likely to be overtraining, undereating, poorly performed skill work, maybe environmental stuff that you keep exposing yourself to. So I think probably the best thing to do for you would be to find out why you keep picking up those injuries and then remove that variable. I know that seems really sort of direct and almost like a dumb thing for me to say, but that's probably it. There's probably, if you keep picking up injuries, there's probably some kind of continuous factor in there, and I think finding what that is going to be key for you. So let's say, and it's purely hypothetical, let's say you're actually trying to also chase weight loss goals like our previous question, but working really, really hard. You might find that manifests in injury after injury after injury. I've been there with that. It could be that you're running trails at the moment at a speed that doesn't suit your your current skill level. It could be anything. I'd be shooting in the dark to guess. So I think find out what it is that's causing the injuries and remove that variable. Give us a shout directly so we can look at that directly for you. But that would be the first port of call for me. Archie WI, when you've got a cold or the flu, do you train? Do you adjust nutrition? Do you write it off? It depends. Once again, it depends. A good maxim we used to use was if it's the neck or above, just crack on training. Neck and below, so if it's in your chest, you probably want to take the time off and let that recover. Purely because you're probably breeding an infection there or something, and you don't want to kind of float it around the place. But that's vague. It depends how ill you are. Really, it depends what the illness is. I would say that more often than not, people will be able to train when they're a little bit ill, a bit of man flu, or however else you want to put it. The likelihood is you can get trained and do a little bit less. I know lots of people who will give up training at the merest sniffle, and they shouldn't do. But if you're really so ill that you're struggling to get out of bed or you can't breathe, for instance, then going and doing a 10K at your fastest clip is going to be pretty stupid. So yeah, it's going to depend on how ill you are, but for the most part, you probably can train through things unless it's sort of a bacterial infection or a virus or something, in which case you probably want to let it run its course. But I think that's going to have to be a depends how you feel, mate response. Okay, another one here. Oh, this is from Ralph again, Ralph Slick. In the one-on-one coaching, is there room and knowledge for CrossFit combined with running? Yes, there is. I'm guessing that your question is, were you to come for one-to-one coaching, can we involve CrossFit in your programming? Do we have the knowledge and understanding? The answer is yes. Yes, we do. We've been involved in that world, or I have, for a very long time in terms of coaching people to regionals, to games, in fact. And yeah, it's something I know very well. We have three programs running at the moment that you can look into. Functional fitness, 5K, half marathon and marathon. The functional fitness is just us being careful about branding, but it's very much set up for any kind of CrossFit enthusiast. So we have got templates ready for that, and we've got a decent coaching pedigree, also from a weightlifting perspective, that we can draw on, and certainly that strength and conditioning expertise that allows us to apply our methodology to that particular sport. So yeah, we've got you covered if that's something you're interested in. Scott Teams WC, Scott_Teams WC says, in your opinion, what is the ceiling for hybrid performance? I don't suppose there is one. I suppose it's what's the ceiling for human performance would be a slightly more appropriate question, because hybrid really is the opportunity to address disparate qualities within a training program. So I guess we'd have to decide what those qualities were, and we can place that anywhere on the spectrum. So if you were to say, how heavy could a lifter lift at the same time as how fast can that lifter run? It depends on what the parameters are. So it's a strange question to answer. I kind of understand the question, but because there's so many parameters and so many ways to kind of divide up what are the disparate elements we're looking at. Are we looking at a powerlifter who wants to be a great swimmer? Are we looking at a weightlifter who wants to be a great triathlete? Are we looking at somebody who wants to just have capacities across all of those, and like a decathlete perhaps, who wants to work at a kind of a higher elite level, all things across a spectrum, and yet not be a specialist in any of them? So then the ceiling is really dependent on the athlete. So there is a ceiling, and that depends on the athlete's personal ceiling, if that makes any sense. So your gauge is as far as you think you can go. I think that's vague but also accurate. Mark Stewart is going from an ultramarathon to a marathon with 3 weeks in between. How much running to program? Very little. Frankly, you want to just make sure you're maintaining your aerobic capacity, and you're gonna have to recover easy from that ultramarathon. There's no way that's not going to leave you tired. So adding in training in between that and your next marathon 3 weeks later should be as minimal as possible, so that you're not tiring yourself. We talk about the degradation rates of certain elements and certain facets of fitness, if you like. So, for instance, if you a highly trained athlete, let's say that they have capacity across the board, and stopped training all of a sudden for 2 months entirely, just didn't train. If we took them back in after 5 days, we would see a degradation immediately in power output. things like aerobic capacity, we probably wouldn't see a degradation in that for even up to 4 weeks. Now, we'd see a skill degradation. They wouldn't be able to run very well. They'd be a bit stiff and unpracticed. But their actual aerobic capacity, once we'd kind of put that skill back in, wouldn't be hugely diminished. So 3 weeks isn't long enough for your aerobic capacity, and therefore your ability to aerobically perform in a marathon. It's not long enough for that to degrade enough for me to be concerned at all. What would be a concern during that time was just keeping moving, keeping limber, allowing the recovery to happen, and allowing that kind of practice of the stress on the joints and the movement itself. So I would keep in some pacing runs, some little practice runs, maybe 2 to 3 a week. Certainly in the first week back after the ultra marathon, I'd maybe even just go out for a nice gentle run, or some cycling, something that's going to kind of turn over the system without actually putting you in any kind of vertical displacement and therefore joint fatigue scenario. So very little is necessary, quote unquote necessary, but you want to keep moving so that you're keeping practicing moving rather than trying to train for a marathon, which ultimately is already well within your wheelhouse at this point. Hopefully that helps. And I think we'll end, Jamie, we're kind of closing in on our allotted time here, I think. So we'll end on one, hopefully not too controversial. We've got this from Watsy_hybrid, who has asked a couple of questions. I think one of them we've already answered. But this one is, does sleep and body metric data from Whoop or smartwatches really matter? That's an interesting one to me, and one that we've discussed here quite a lot. Yes and no. It matters in terms of whether it matters to you, whether or not you are actually using that data intelligently, and or whether it's interfering with you in particular. And then there are probably some technical questions about how reliable it is, which will depend on the tech itself. We are keen to say to our athletes that if they have the capacity, that they wear a chest strap instead of just a wrist monitor, because the optic sensor is not as accurate as an electric sensor that's going to sit and understand electric impulse on your chest. So the better the technology, the better the information, the more intelligently it's used, the more we can glean from it. So when we're talking about GPS and we're talking about movement and pacing data, then getting a huge amount of that and not really understanding what you're doing with it isn't of any value at all. Understanding what it is you're trying to achieve from it is valuable. The other thing that's very useful for metrics, for Whoop, Garmin's, and any other, I think there's the Core rings, anything that's measuring recovery and performance on a holistic basis, so where it's picking up HRV and things, can be really very, very useful. Much in the same way as we suggest to athletes that they, when they first start trying to manage their diet, that MyFitnessPal or other tools like that are very, very useful, because to track data at the very, very beginning of embarking upon a process such as weight loss or such as performance management is very useful, because it allows you to understand your parameters, it allows you to understand the world within your working, and it allows to see things in a more objective way. The lens is different. So going back to using wearables, you might not have a fully focused understanding of what your sleep patterns are like. You might think, well, I go to sleep X round about such and such a time, and I get up round about such and such a time, but it might not be actually accurate. So tracking that and making sure that you understand it is very, very useful. And the act of tracking itself can be very useful, because it allows you to be mindful about these things. So that's why journaling works very, very well in those scenarios. So if you use these tools to track, to allow you to understand that data, to allow you to understand your own habits, then you can use that information to change the habits in a positive way. So they're very, very useful in that sense. And obviously the GPS and the tracking management, things that we ask our athletes to do, is very, very useful, because then we can track whether or not somebody's actually progressing, and or track external stressors to understand whether or not performance has drifted a little bit because of somebody becoming a new father or somebody becoming a new mother, or however it might work. So all these things can be tracked through data. Where we push back against it is where that becomes something that is super relied upon, where the opportunity to kind of interact with your own self and interact with your own environment and to feel how you feel, and then operate based on those metrics, which are sort of internal metrics, I suppose, that can be clouded very much. So I guess if you wake up in the morning and you look at your Whoop and it tells you how you feel, and then you build your day based around what your digitation has described your mood should be, then you've kind of missed the wood for the trees. And that's the pushback I have with it quite a lot with athletes, is that, oh, well, my Whoop's red, so I didn't train today. It's like, no, that's not telling you not to do anything. It's telling you to be aware of other things. And have you been concerned about other things? Are you tracking? What was your sleep pattern like? Have you lost control of that, etc., etc.? And also, people then stop having that kind of internal dialogue with themselves. A good example, he's right at the beginning of the podcast, was my coming in here and pulling a weight off the floor and immediately knowing how to auto-regulate based on what I could do on that given day. And none of that had anything to do with metrics. I knew I was tired that day. I expected a little bit of that, which might have played into it a little bit from a placebo perspective. But it is what it was, and I felt it, and I interacted with it, and then I adjusted based on how I felt. If I'd been responding to how my Whoop told me I felt in the morning, I might not have lifted at all, and I might have lost the opportunity to adapt in that auto-regulated fashion. And the other problem that I've got with it is, personally, is when people go out into the hills or mountains or great big expeditions, and they spend their entire time lost in the GPS, lost in the tracking, lost in their heart rate, and forget where they are and miss the opportunity to be in the real world. So that's no different to people pushing back against having smartphones and doom scrolling their day away. The same can happen with wearable tech. So it's very useful if used appropriately as a tool. It's also can be very detrimental if you allow it to engulf your mindset and take over your own sort of autonomy and agency. Hopefully that isn't too much of a waffle, but that's how I feel, and I think really how Omnia feels about wearables. Fergus uses his brilliantly, and you can tune into his channels and listen to him talk about his use of those wearables. On a few given videos, I think, given over specifically to that. I have my own approach to it, and both of us make that work really, really well for us. But don't let it take you over. I think that's probably the best answer I've got for that. And on that note, on that long dialogue from me with my dry mouth and my need for more coffee, I'm going to sign off. I would like to say a huge thank you to everybody. There are many, many more questions here, but my usual waffling means I've drowned out the opportunity for them to be heard. But a huge thank you to everybody who has written in here and taken the time to ask questions. Hopefully we'll try and get back to these one-to-one. If we can't, maybe you can email, you can message us, and hopefully we'll get back to these. I think Ian had suggested he's messaged us directly. We've missed that so far, so there's an example. But we're here. And we really appreciate you and your time. Go back to that very beginning bit, subscribe and follow, and share this and see if we can't help some others with my facetious answering. In the meantime, that's another Omnia Performance podcast with myself, Big Jonny Payne.